Okay, let's get into it. Today, we are doing a deep dive into what is, I think, pretty clearly the defining story of our century. It's this massive high-stakes competition between the United States and China. And it's not some abstract political thing. It shapes everything.
Everything. From the price of the phone in your pocket to, the very rules that are going to govern technologies like AI in the future.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack all of that. We've got this huge stack of source material you shared covering, everything from history, trade, the military balance.
All the way to their soft power strategies, yeah.
And we're going to distill it all. The goal is for you, listening, to walk away with a really clear, simple understanding of this super complex relationship. You'll feel informed, not, overwhelmed.
That's the plan. Because this story is really about two giants who are competing fiercely, but who are also so deeply intertwined they can't let go. It's that tension that makes it so fascinating.
To really get a handle on the rivalry today, I think we have to go back. We have to start at the beginning. Because China's rise, it's maybe the fastest, most dramatic economic story in all of human history.
It really is. And if you rewind the clock to, say, the 1970s, the country is almost unrecognizable from what it is today.
What are we talking about specifically? How poor was it?
Well, think about it this way. After decades of war and the massive disruption of the Cultural Revolution, China was expanded. It was isolated. It was overwhelmingly agrarian.
So most people were farmers.
The vast majority. Per capita income was on par with some of the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There were very few factories, almost no international trade to speak of. It was an economy just running on fumes.
So something had to give. The system was broken.
Completely. And this is where one person really changes the course of history.
Deng Xiaoping.
Deng Xiaoping. He comes to power in the late 70s, and he just has this incredibly pragmatic vision. He understood that all the ideological purity in the world wasn't feeding people. Economic growth had to be the priority.
And his big idea was basically, to get rich is glorious, which, for a leader in a communist state at that time, must have been, shocking.
It was revolutionary. He wasn't just tweaking policies. He was fundamentally changing the economic DNA of the country. And the core decision was simple. Open up to the world and let businesses, grow.
So how did he do it? You can't just flip a switch on an economy that size.
No, you can't. He was clever. He started with experiments. He allowed foreign companies to come in and invest, but only in certain areas.
These are the special economic zones, right? The SEZs?
Exactly. Places like Shenzhen, which back then was just a small fishing village right across the border from Hong Kong.
Hard to imagine now.
It is. But he essentially drew a circle around it, said, okay, in here we're going to try some market principles. We'll have fewer restrictions, tax breaks. Let's just see what happens. And crucially, he also started encouraging Chinese people to start their own companies.
And the results were pretty immediate.
Immediate and staggering.
Yeah.
From the 1980s on, China's economy grew at a rate that was almost unheard of. We're talking 9–10% a year for decades.
So what did that mean for the average person?
It meant the greatest and fastest reduction of poverty in human history. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of, absolute poverty. They moved from farms into jobs in these new factories and offices.
And you see this explosion of cities?
Oh, absolutely. Cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing, they became these massive, gleaming hubs of trade, finance, and technology. This is when China really earned that title, the factory of the world.
They were making everything. Clothes, toys, electronics.
Everything. But they were also thinking ahead. This wasn't just about cheap labor. The government was pouring money into building for the future.
Infrastructure.
World-class infrastructure, high-speed rail, brand new airports, the biggest ports in the world, and, very importantly, education. They started training millions and millions of new engineers and scientists.
They were already looking past just being the world's factory. They were planning to move up the value chain.
That was always the plan. He started focusing on strategic industries early on, things like renewable energy, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence.
And they started projecting this newfound power outwards, which brings us to the Belt and Road Initiative.
The BRI, yeah. It was this huge, sprawling global project to build roads, railways, and ports in other countries.
What's the goal there? Is it just about making trade easier for China?
That's part of it, for sure. But it's a dual goal. It's also about creating a network of global friends and partners, countries that are economically tied to Beijing.
Okay, so as all of this is happening, as China gets richer and more powerful and more confident, what's the view in the U.S.?
Well, that's what's so interesting. Initially, the U.S. view was actually really positive.
They welcomed it.
They did. It was good for the global economy. It meant cheaper goods for American consumers. And the hope was that a richer China would eventually become a more democratic China.
But that's not what happened.
No. As China grew, the worry started to creep in. The question became, is China going to challenge America's position? Are they going to try to set new rules for the world? And that realization, that shift, that's when the balance of power really changed. Which brings us to where we are now, to the economic battleground. And it's such a paradox.
It really is, because the sources make it so clear that these two countries, for all their competition, they absolutely need each other to stay strong.
They're completely entangled. You can't pull them apart without both sides getting seriously hurt.
Let's talk about those trade flows for a second. The U.S. buys just a huge amount of stuff from China.
A staggering amount. Electronics, clothes, furniture, you name it. China is the world's largest exporter, and the U.S. is its best customer.
And what does China buy from the U.S.?
A lot of food, for one. Soybeans, meat, and very importantly, high-end technology. Things like advanced computer chips, airplanes, really specialized factory machines, stuff they can't make themselves yet.
Okay, so that's the connection. But the source of all the tension, the thing you always hear politicians talking about, is the trade deficit.
The trade deficit, which simply means the U.S. buys way, way more from China than China buys from the U.S.
And the concern in America for years has been that this isn't just an accounting number. It represents real-world consequences.
Exactly. It represents factories closing down in the U.S., jobs moving overseas, and a general feeling that the economic playing field is tilted.
Right. And that leads to these accusations of unfair play. It's not just that Chinese labor is cheaper. The U.S. has some very specific complaints.
Very specific. The first one, which you don't hear as much about now, but was a big deal, was currency manipulation.
The idea that China was keeping its currency artificially low to make its products cheaper.
That's the one. Then there are the state subsidies. The Chinese government would pour money into certain industries, making it impossible for American companies to compete fairly.
And the big one, the really explosive accusation, is technology theft.
This is probably the single biggest point of friction. The complaint is that China has systematically stolen intellectual property from American companies for years.
And all of this tension eventually boiled over into the trade war?
It did. The U.S. started slapping these huge tariffs, these special taxes, on Chinese goods.
The idea being to make Chinese products more expensive so people would buy American instead.
That was the goal. But of course, China didn't just sit there and take it. They hit back immediately.
They put tariffs on American goods.
Right. Especially things like soybeans, which directly targeted farmers in the American heartland.
And what was the impact of all this? Did it just affect the U.S. and China?
Oh, no. It sent shockwaves through the entire global economy. It created huge uncertainty. Companies didn't know where to build their factories. And ultimately, it meant higher prices for consumers everywhere.
But even with all this fighting, this trade war, we come back to that core idea.
Interdependence.
They're still linked. They can't fully break up.
They can't. Take Apple, for example. It's an American company, but it absolutely depends on Chinese factories to assemble the iPhone. At the same time, a lot of Chinese tech companies depend on American computer chips to make their products work.
So neither side can really afford to just walk away.
Not without causing a massive economic crisis for themselves and for the rest of the world. It's this unbreakable connection.
And now it seems like the competition is shifting. It's not just about who sells more toys or T-shirts anymore.
Not at all. It's shifting to a much higher level. The real fight now is about who is going to lead the industries of the future. We're talking about AI, green energy, advanced manufacturing.
Which is the perfect bridge to our next section, because this race for tomorrow's technology, this is where the stakes get incredibly high. Okay, the race for the future. I mean, the sources are unanimous on this. Whoever leads in technology, we're talking AI, 5G, robotics, space, they don't just get a stronger economy. They get to set the terms for the future.
It's about total advantage. Economic, military, diplomatic. Technology is the high ground in the 21st century. And both the U.S. and China know it.
So let's start with the biggest one, the one that seems to touch everything else. Artificial intelligence, AI.
Right. And for you listening, you know what AI is. It's not science fiction anymore. It's in voice assistance. It's helping with medical research. It's used in national security.
It's about creating machines that can think and learn. And the race to be the best at that is intense.
Incredibly intense.
Yeah.
The U.S. has some major strengths, right?
Yeah.
You got the tech giants, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and the best universities in the world doing foundational research.
But China has made becoming the world leader in AI by 2030 a national priority. They're pouring billions into it.
It's a full-on national mission, and they have a huge advantage in one key area: data.
Right. To train an AI, you need massive amounts of data.
And China has it.
Right.
With a huge population and, frankly, fewer privacy restrictions than in the West, Chinese companies can gather and use vast data sets to train their AI models much, much faster. That's a powerful edge.
Okay, let's shift from software to hardware. The battle for 5G networks. Why is faster internet a national security issue?
Because 5G isn't just about faster downloads on your phone. Yeah. It's the underlying infrastructure for everything that's coming next.
Smart cities, self-driving cars.
Exactly. The Internet of Things. Everything connected, all communicating instantly. And for a long time, one Chinese company was poised to build that infrastructure for most of the world. Huawei. They became the leader in making the best and often the cheapest 5G equipment. And they were selling it everywhere.
Which set off massive alarm bells in the US.
Huge alarms. The concern was security. If a Chinese company, which is ultimately beholden to the Chinese government, builds your country's critical communication network,
they could potentially have a backdoor, a way to spy or even shut it down in a crisis.
It was the fear. So the U.S. launched this global diplomatic campaign to convince its allies not to use Huawei, and they also took steps to cut off Huawei's access to key technologies like American microchips.
It's a clear example of technology and geopolitics just completely merging.
Absolutely. Now let's look up to the new frontier: space.
This isn't the Cold War space race. It's different this time.
It is. The U.S. has traditionally been the leader, of course, with NASA. And now you have these incredible private companies like SpaceX pushing the boundaries, aiming for the moon and Mars.
But China is catching up fast.
Incredibly fast. They've had successful missions to the moon, they've launched their own space station, and they have plans for Mars, too.
And why does this matter? Is it just about national pride?
It's partly pride, sure, but it's also about strategic advantage. Space is critical for satellites, for communication, for GPS, for intelligence gathering, and it could one day be about resources too. It represents technological power.
And finally, there's the tech race that might be the most important for the planet itself: green energy.
Yes. Solar power, wind, electric vehicles, batteries. This is another area where the competition is fierce.
And this is an area where China has a huge lead, isn't it?
A dominant lead. In many ways. They are by far the largest producer of solar panels and electric cars in the world. They control a huge part of the supply chain.
So as the world tries to go green, it's becoming more dependent on China.
In many respects, yes. So the U.S. is focusing on innovation, trying to develop the next generation of clean energy technologies to leapfrog what China is doing now.
So whoever wins this race doesn't just get a big economic boost.
They get to lead the global transition away from fossil fuels. It's a massive economic and moral advantage.
So what's the big takeaway here? This whole technology race, it's about more than just who has the best gadgets.
It's about who writes the rules. It's a battle over values. Who gets to set the standards for things like privacy, security, and freedom in this new technological age we're all entering? That's what's really at stake. And that race for technological dominance flows directly into our next topic: projecting power. We're talking about military rivalry and global influence.
This is where the competition becomes, well, much more dangerous. Let's start with the basics. The U.S. military has been the world's most powerful since World War II. Huge budget, bases all over the globe.
It's a military designed to operate anywhere in the world at any time. It has global reach.
China's military, the PLA, has been modernizing at a breathtaking pace. But their focus is different, right?
It's very different. It's much more regional. The primary goal of China's military modernization is to be able to challenge American power close to its own borders, specifically in places like the South China Sea.
And that's where we see the most direct friction at sea. The U.S. Navy is dominant, but China's Navy is now the biggest in the world by number of ships.
They've been building ships at an incredible rate. And the flashpoint is the South China Sea, where China has built these artificial islands and put military bases on them.
Which directly challenges the U.S. Navy's ability to operate freely in what are supposed to be international waters.
Exactly. It leads to these tense standoffs with ships and planes coming very close to each other. It's a real powder keg.
in there, the U.S. still has an edge with its advanced stealth fighters.
It does, but China is developing its own advanced jets. And both countries are working on hypersonic missiles weapons that are so fast they're almost impossible to defend against.
And then there are the newer domains of warfare, space and cyber.
These are critical. Space is a battleground for satellites. Whoever controls the satellites controls communication and surveillance. The U.S. even created the Space Force to focus on this.
And cyber warfare is this constant, invisible conflict happening every day.
All the time. Both nations have sophisticated cyber forces that can defend their own networks, but also attack others. The potential targets are things like power grids, communication systems, sensitive government data. It's a huge vulnerability for modern societies.
Now, military power isn't just about ships and planes. It's also about who your friends are. Alliances.
And this is a major strength for the U.S. It has this incredible network of long-standing alliances, NATO in Europe, and countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia in Asia.
China doesn't really have formal alliances like that.
Not in the same way. Instead, they're building influence through trade and investment. They're strengthening their ties with countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, creating a different kind of partnership network.
Which brings us to soft power, the battle for hearts and minds.
Right. This is influencing others not through force, but through attraction. And the U.S. has traditionally been a master of this.
American culture, you mean? Movies?
Yeah.
Music?
Exactly. Hollywood, pop music, but also American ideas like democracy and human rights, plus foreign aid, educational programs. That's all part of U.S. soft power.
So what's China's alternative? How are they trying to win friends and influence people?
They're offering a different model. They offer strong economic relationships. They'll come in and build a port or a railway. And they do it without making demands about political change.
So they don't tie their investments to a country's human rights record, for example.
Precisely. Their message is all about national sovereignty and non-interference. For a lot of countries, especially in the developing world, that's a very attractive offer.
You can really see this playing out in places like Africa.
Clearly. The U.S. might focus on aid for health and democracy. China will focus on building big, visible infrastructure projects that create jobs.
So for many nations, they're feeling this pressure to choose a side, but most of them don't want to.
Nobody wants to choose. Most countries want to work with both. They want the security and investment from the U.S., and they want the trade and infrastructure from China. They're trying to get the best of both worlds while staying neutral.
Okay, so if military competition is about who holds the power, our next section is really about how that power is used to write the global rulebook. We're talking about international organizations.
Exactly. The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank. These are the stages where global decisions get made. If you have influence here, you get to shape the world.
And the U.S. has traditionally played the leading role. They helped create most of these institutions after World War II.
They did. And through them, they've promoted a certain vision for the world one based on stability, democracy, and free markets. They've been the primary funders and leaders for decades.
But now China's role is changing. They're no longer a passive member.
Not at all. As their power has grown, they've been seeking much greater leadership and influence. They want a bigger voice, not just for themselves, but for other developing countries to reflect the new realities of global power.
So where do we see the conflict playing out? Let's start with the UN.
Well, China is much more active now. They're a major funder of peacekeeping. They contribute a lot of troops. But on the Security Council, their permanent seat means they often disagree with the U.S. on how to handle global crises or who to place sanctions on.
And what about the World Trade Organization, the WTO? That seems like a real flashpoint.
It's been badly damaged by the rivalry. The U.S. accuses China breaking the rules for years with illegal subsidies, technology theft, and not opening up their markets.
And China denies all that.
Of course. And these disputes has basically paralyzed the WTO's ability to function. Everyone agrees it needs to be reformed, but they can't agree on how.
Now, in global finance, with the IMF and the World Bank, the U.S. has always been dominant, but China has found a way to challenge that, haven't they?
They have. They've created their own alternatives. Institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
And what do these new banks do?
They offer another choice for developing countries that need loans to build infrastructure. It gives those countries more options so they don't have to rely only on the U.S.-led institutions.
And underneath all this jockeying for position in these organizations, there's a real clash of values, isn't there?
A fundamental clash. The U.S. vision, which is baked into these institutions, is all about transparency, free markets, and political freedom.
And China's vision
Is very different. It's about respecting national sovereignty, focusing on economic development first, and crucially, not interfering in a country's internal politics.
And when you have these two competing visions, it makes it really hard to cooperate on global problems.
It really does. And we saw that so clearly during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Global response was not great.
It was a failure of cooperation. Instead of working together, the U.S. and China were mostly just blaming each other, and that really hindered a coordinated global response when we needed it most.
And then there's the biggest challenge of all, climate.
The climate challenge. Both countries are absolutely critical here. They're the two biggest economies and the two biggest carbon emitters. Nothing can happen without them.
But even here, they compete.
They compete over whose technology will lead the green revolution, and they argue over who should lead the way and bear the costs. So even on an issue that threatens the entire planet, the rivalry still gets in the way of progress. So we've laid out the history, the economics, the military and tech races. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. Where is this all headed?
Right. What are the possible futures for this rivalry? Is it destined for conflict, or can they find a way to manage it?
Well, the sources lay out a few different scenarios, a few possible paths. Let's start with the most optimistic one. We could call it peaceful competition.
What does that future look like?
It means the rivalry in tech and trade continues. It might even get more intense, and this is the key part, both sides play by the rules, and they work hard to avoid any direct confrontations.
So they compete, but they also cooperate where they have to on things like climate change.
Exactly. And in this scenario, the competition actually pushes both countries to be better, to innovate more. It's a rivalry that, in a way, benefits the world.
Okay, that's the hopeful path. What's the next scenario?
A much more worrying one. Let's call it rising tensions and deepening division.
This is where the world splits into two camps.
That's right. Mistrust grows, dialogue breaks down, disagreements over Taiwan or trade get worse, and the result is that the world starts to fracture. Other countries feel forced to pick a side, the U.S. camp or the China camp.
And in that world, solving any global problem becomes almost impossible.
Much, much harder. And the risk of a mistake, of a misunderstanding leading to something worse, goes way up.
Which leads us to the nightmare scenario, accidental conflict.
This is what keeps military planners up at night.
Yeah.
It's not about one side deciding to start a war. It's about a small incident, a collision between a ship and a plane in the South China Sea, for example, that spirals out of control because neither side backs down.
A crisis that nobody wanted but nobody could stop. Managing that risk is a huge challenge.
It's the central challenge.
Okay, so is there a middle path, a fourth scenario?
There is. A kind of hopeful but realistic path. We can call it managed cooperation.
What does that mean?
It means both sides accept that they are rivals with deep disagreements. But they also recognize that the future of the planet depends on them working together on the big stuff: clean energy, global health, preventing pandemics. So they build strong systems for dialogue to manage the competition and focus on those common goals.
It's not about being friends, it's about being pragmatic.
Exactly. Pragmatism over ideology.
Now, the sources are clear that it's not just up to the U.S. and China to decide which path we go down. Other countries have a role to play.
A huge role. Because most countries, as we said, don't want to choose sides. They can act as a bridge, as mediators, pushing both giants toward peaceful solutions and cooperation.
And what about us? What about people?
In the end, it comes down to people. Citizens can shape this by staying informed, by pushing their leaders away from conflict and towards cooperation. The future isn't just decided in Washington and Beijing. It's shaped by all of us demanding a more stable and peaceful world. So, after this whole deep dive, what have we learned? We've seen this incredibly complex relationship. It's part dependence, part intense competition, and part a necessary, sometimes desperate, need to cooperate.
And it's not abstract. This rivalry, it really does affect the price you pay for things, the jobs that are available, and what the next big innovation is going to be.
It's the story that is writing the script for the 21st century.
It really is. We hope this analysis has given you, our listener, the tools and the clarity you need to follow this story as it keeps developing. You understand the history, the stakes, and the competing visions for how the world should work.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought to leave you with. This competition between the USA and China. It isn't just about who has more ships or who sells more cars. It's happening right now, and it is actively shaping the ethical rules and the standards for the technologies that are about to change our lives.
Things like AI and genetic engineering.
Exactly. So the real challenge for you isn't just to guess who wins. The challenge is to think about how your own country is responding to this rivalry. The choices your nation makes about things like data privacy, who its tech allies are, what ethical lines it draws, those choices will help determine the kind of world we all live in for the next 50 years. It's about the values that get embedded in the code of our future.
A lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take that huge, sometimes confusing pile of global sources and research, and we boil it all down so you can get up to speed fast.
And we know so much of the recent conversation about the US and China. It's all been about technology.
Right. AI, chips, quantum computing.
Yeah.
We've spent a lot of time on that.
Exactly, and that's critical stuff, no doubt. Tech is the bedrock of future economic power. But if we just stop there,
Right.
we miss the bigger picture.
Yeah, we miss the older, more fundamental pillars of this whole competition.
We do. This isn't just a tech race. It's a contest over global security. It's about who sets the rules, really, for the 21st century.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to zoom out. We're moving past the microchips to tackle the other massive pillars of this competition. This whole deep dive is your shortcut to understanding the full picture.
And to help you navigate this, we've broken it down into 3 key areas.
Okay.
First, we're going to dive into military power and security. You know, the traditional hard power. We're talking ships, steel, strategy.
Then second,
We'll shift gears to the competition of ideas and influence. This is the world of soft power, much more subtle. The battle for hearts and minds.
and finally, we're going to get to the really tough part. The critical question of cooperation for the future.
Because at the end of the day, no matter how much they compete, they are on the same planet.
And they face threats that are just too big for one country to solve alone. Understanding all 3 of these, the military piece, the ideas piece, and the need to cooperate is it's essential for figuring out the decades ahead.
So let's jump in with the most tangible part, hard power.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the really serious stuff.
Yeah.
Military power. For the last 70, 80 years, the entire global security system has been built on one single idea, really.
And what's that?
The unquestioned military dominance of the United States. We have to start there to understand how much things have changed.
That's the baseline, absolutely. For a very long time, think post-World War II, and definitely after the Cold War, the U.S. wasn't just a military power, it was the military power. And this wasn't just about having, the best gadgets or the fanciest planes, though they had those.
Sure.
It was about building and policing a global system that, for the most part, benefited almost everyone.
Yeah, when we talk about that strength, the sources really dig into what it's made of. A huge high-tech Navy.
The world's largest air force.
And this incredible global footprint, this network of bases in dozens and dozens of countries.
That network of bases is, I think, maybe the most unique part of it all. Strategists call it the hub and spoke system.
And what does that mean practically?
It means the U.S. has the logistics, it has the forces already in place to respond to a crisis almost anywhere in the world in hours or days.
That's not cheap.
Oh, not at all. We're talking billions a year just to keep the lights on, to keep the supply lines running, to rotate forces through Europe, the Middle East, Asia.
The scale of that is just...
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your head around. It's not just runways. It's food, fuel, spare parts, medicine, all thousands of miles from home.
It's an entire architecture built up over 70 years. And the Navy is really the heart of that system.
Yeah, aircraft carriers.
The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier strike groups, these are not just ships. They are floating sovereign American airfields.
And they can project power from the sea hundreds of miles inland.
Exactly. So that brings us to the why. What was the point of all this? The sources are really clear on 2 main purposes.
Okay, what are they?
First, to protect the international trade routes, the arteries of the global economy.
And second,
to support its allies, to reassure partners in key places, especially Europe and Asia.
let's stick with the trade routes for a second. That's like providing a global public good, isn't it?
That's the perfect way to describe it. Think about the choke points. The Straits of Malacca. Something like 40% of the world's trade goes through there.
The Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz.
Where all the oil comes from.
Yeah.
For decades, the U.S. Navy has essentially guaranteed that those waterways stay open for everyone.
And if they didn't, the economic impact would be?
Devastating. Global supply chains would just collapse. The free flow of goods, of energy, the very thing that modern prosperity is built on, it would grind to a halt. The U.S. basically took on the security bill for the world's trading system.
And the second point, supporting allies, that's about deterrence.
It's all about deterrence and collective security. In Europe, you have NATO. In Asia, you have treaties with Japan, South Korea, Australia. It keeps regional squabbles from becoming major wars.
Because any potential aggressor knows they're not just facing one country, they're facing the U.S. and its partners.
Precisely. And that stability, you see, that allowed countries like Germany and Japan to focus on their economies instead of on massive military spending.
So the U.S. strength wasn't just for show. It was the foundation that allowed for this whole era of globalization. But, and this is the big question, how sustainable is that role now, especially with a rising competitor?
Well, that is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? The cost, financially and politically, is huge. And it's not just the cost that makes it unsustainable. It's the fact that a competitor has emerged that is specifically trying to neutralize that advantage, especially in its own backyard.
And that brings us right to China's modernization.
Exactly.
That long period of sort of comfortable U.S. dominance.
Yeah.
It's being challenged. And the sources all use the same words. The speed and the sheer scale of China's military buildup is, well, it's a game changer.
The transformation has been, frankly, breathtaking. In the last, say, 25 years, Beijing has thrown enormous resources into its navy, the plan.
And they've moved it from what was essentially a coastal defense force.
Right. Mostly old Soviet-era ships to a true blue water navy, one that can operate far from home.
And this is the headline fact that just blows my mind every time I read it. China now has the largest navy in the world by a number of ships.
That fact alone is revolutionary. It completely changes the strategic calculus in Asia almost overnight.
But we should add some nuance there, right? The number of ships isn't everything.
You're absolutely right to point that out. The U.S. Navy still has a massive lead in tonnage, meaning its ships are, on average, much larger and more powerful.
And nuclear-powered vessels.
Crucially, which gives them unlimited range. But China's fleet is very modern, and it's full of capable destroyers, frigates, submarines, and their shipbuilding industry is it's on a scale we haven't seen. They're building ships faster than anywhere.
That pace is just staggering. So what are they actually building? The sources mention aircraft carriers, advanced missiles.
Let's get specific, because this is where it really matters. The carriers, like the Shandong and the newer Fijian, they signal a clear ambition for global power projection. That used to be an American monopoly.
But you're saying the carriers aren't even the main story.
In my view, no. The real game changer is their missile arsenal, specifically their anti-ship ballistic missiles. The U.S. military has a nickname for them.
Carrier killer missiles.
That's the one. Things like the DF-21D and DF-26.
Okay, carrier killer. That sounds terrifying. What does that technology actually do? How does it change the strategy?
It creates something military planners call anti-accessory denial, or A2AD for short.
A2AD, right.
The whole system, missiles, radar, satellites, all designed to do one thing: prevent the U.S. from operating its ships safely near China's coast.
Because these missiles can hit a moving aircraft carrier from thousands of miles away.
That's the design. And that dramatically increases the risk for the U.S. to intervene in, say, a crisis over Taiwan.
So if the whole U.S. strategy for decades has been to park a carrier strike group offshore,
China's strategy is to make that so dangerous, so costly, that the U.S. has to think twice. It forces them to operate from much farther away where they're less effective.
it basically neutralizes America's biggest advantage.
In that specific region, yes. It forces a complete rethink of every U.S. plan for the Indo-Pacific.
So why are they doing all this? What's the big strategic goal? It can't just be for defense.
Well, China's goal is completely tied to its economy. First, yes, it's about protecting their borders and dealing with what they see as territorial issues, like Taiwan.
But the second part is bigger.
Much bigger. It's about protecting their global trade interests.
Because China is the world's factory.
Exactly. If you're the world's biggest trading nation, and almost all of that trade goes by sea, your entire economy is vulnerable if you can't protect those sea lanes yourself.
So building a blue water navy is it's economic self-preservation.
It's the logical next step for an economic superpower. As their investments and goods flow all over the world through the Indian Ocean, the Suez Canal, They feel they need the ability to protect those routes themselves.
And that's why there's so much focus on the seas near Asia, especially the South China Sea.
Overwhelmingly, it's their front yard, and they claim almost all of it. So they're concentrating their naval power there, and that changes everything for their neighbors.
So you have these two massive navies now operating in the same crowded waters. That sounds like a recipe for tension.
It leads directly to geopolitical tension. You have two huge powers competing for influence over the same critical piece of ocean. It is inherently a high-stakes, volatile situation.
And the sources really hammer at this point. The biggest danger isn't necessarily a planned war, it's the risk of a mistake. An accident.
A misunderstanding. That accidental escalation is what keeps strategists up at night.
You mean like a ship captain making a wrong move?
Exactly. Think back to 2001 when a U.S. spy plane and a Chinese jet collided. That was when China's military was way less advanced.
Right.
Today, you have faster jets, more ships operating closer together, electronic warfare. The margin for error is razor thin. One miscalculation could lead to a catastrophe.
But even with all that tension, there's a consensus among the experts, and our sources all agree on this.
That neither side actually wants a war.
No. A war between two nuclear-armed economic giants would be, as they put it, terrible for everyone.
It would be unthinkable. Their economies are so tangled up, a war would instantly crash the global economy. It would be a depression worse than anything in history.
So that shared economic pain,
Yeah.
that's the constraint. That's what keeps the peace.
It's a huge part of the deterrence. It forces a kind of tense stability.
So this is the paradox of military power then. You build all these weapons not to start a war, but to prevent one.
That is the essence of deterrence. You make your ability to retaliate so obvious, so credible, that your opponent never even thinks about starting a fight.
So in this context, the military isn't just for fighting, it's a form of communication.
It's a very serious form of diplomacy. It's how you show your status. The sources put it perfectly. It's a way of saying, I am strong, so you have to listen to me.
That's a great way to put it. So when we see a carrier deployment or a missile test, it's not really about a plan to attack.
No, it's a message.
It's a strategic signal.
Exactly. Think of it like a high-stakes poker game. When the U.S. flies a bomber over the South China Sea, the message is, we can operate here and don't forget it.
And when China launches a new aircraft carrier,
The message is, we're a global power now, and we can defend our interests anywhere. It's all a negotiation, a very tense negotiation, using military hardware instead of words.
which is a perfect pivot. Because if the military standoff is the negotiation over physical space, the next battle is for something much less tangible.
It's the battle for minds and for allegiance.
We're moving from hard power to soft power.
Exactly. From the visible power of navies to the invisible power of ideas and culture.
So let's define that term. What exactly is soft power?
It's the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion. It's not about guns or money. That's hard power.
Right.
Soft power is about making other countries want what you want. They admire your values, they like your culture, they see your political system as legitimate.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because if people in another country admire you, if they watch your movies, listen to your music,
They're much more likely to support your foreign policy goals.
they see your government's actions in a more positive light, it just makes everything easier.
It does. It creates this natural pull, this gravity towards your way of doing things. You don't have to argue so hard for your trade rules if everyone already thinks your system is the best one.
And for most of the last century, the United States had a massive, almost unbeatable advantage here.
Oh, an overwhelming advantage. For decades, the U.S. really set the global standard for what a modern, desirable life looked like.
Let's get specific. What were the tools of that influence? The sources give so many great examples. People all over the world were watching Hollywood movies.
Listening to American music, wearing American jeans.
And, crucially, trying to get into American universities.
Hollywood was the big one. It was a global aspiration machine. From the 1950s onward, movies just broadcast this image of the American dream.
The suburban house, the big car.
Right. And that image got tangled up with the idea of democracy itself. It created a global demand not just for American stuff, but for American freedom.
And the music, too. Rock and roll, hip-hop. These were symbols of rebellion and youth culture that spread everywhere.
They really were. They often acted as a kind of cultural wedge for American ideas in places that were much more traditional or authoritarian.
But you mentioned universities. That feels more strategic.
It's possibly the most powerful long-term tool. When a student comes to study in the U.S., they get this deep immersion in a culture of open debate, of intellectual freedom.
And then they go home.
They go home and they become leaders. They become CEOs, government ministers, top professors, and they have a fundamental understanding and usually a sympathy for the American system.
It creates this global network of elites who kind of speak the same language.
But the appeal wasn't just the cool stuff, the movies and the music. It was the ideology behind it.
This is the core of it. The sources say it was the American idea of democracy and individual freedom.
That combination was so potent, it was a dual promise. You can get rich through free markets, and you can be free through democracy.
That was the winning story for a long time, especially against the Soviet Union.
It absolutely was. But, and there's a big but, so that story has gotten a little complicated lately.
You mean because of the political turmoil inside the U.S.?
Exactly. The polarization, the gridlock, the questions about its own democratic processes. That stuff gets noticed around the world. It starts to chip away at the appeal.
So the soft power advantage isn't a permanent thing?
Not at all. It has to be maintained. And when the country promoting democracy looks unstable itself, it creates an opening.
An opening for an alternative story.
An opening that China has been very, very eager to fill.
Okay, so let's talk about that alternative story. China's counter-narrative. They're actively trying to show the world that there's another way to be successful.
It's a direct ideological challenge. For years, the West pushed what was called the Washington Consensus. Free markets, deregulation, democracy. China is now offering the Beijing Consensus.
And what's that? What are the key parts of this Chinese model?
It's built on three things that are very different from the U.S. model: stability, hard work, and most importantly, strong government planning.
Stability is the big selling point, isn't it?
It's huge. For a lot of developing countries that have been through decades of chaos, coups, and political instability, the promise of just calm, predictable governance is incredibly attractive.
They want to grow their economies, not have a political revolution every few years.
And China has this incredibly powerful piece of evidence on its side.
The 800 million people lifted out of poverty.
The single greatest poverty reduction story in human history. And they can go to the developing world and say, look what we did. We did this through strong, centralized planning, not through messy, slow democracy.
So how are they exporting this idea? It's not like they have a global Hollywood.
No, their methods are different, more state-directed. It often starts with things like the Confucius Institutes.
These are the language and culture centers they've opened up all over the world.
Right. And on the surface, they're just teaching Mandarin and promoting Chinese culture. But critics say they also push Beijing's political line and avoid sensitive topics like Taiwan or Tibet.
They're also offering lots of scholarships for foreign students to come to China.
Doing the exact same thing the U.S. has done for years, building those long-term relationships with future leaders, and they're massively expanding their state media, like CGTN and Xinhua, to offer a non-Western perspective on world events.
So all of this is in service of one core argument.
The core assertion is this: you can get rich, and you can be modern without becoming a Western-style democracy.
It's a direct challenge to the idea that as countries get wealthier, they naturally become more free and democratic.
It completely upends that assumption, which was the bedrock of Western foreign policy for decades.
But what are the risks of that centralized model? The sources must point to some downsides. A system without debate or dissent can have big blind spots, can't it?
That's the main critique. Central planning can be incredibly effective at big projects, like building a massive high-speed rail network. But it's not great at self-correction.
What do you mean?
If the central plan is wrong, or if a crisis hits that nobody predicted, the system can be very slow to adapt because there's no open debate to sound the alarm early.
Whereas the U.S. system, for all its chaos, has markets and a free press that can react and correct course much faster.
It's a trade-off. China offers speed and stability. The U.S. offers resilience and adaptation, but with a lot of political messiness, and the world is watching to see which one works better.
So you have these two competing visions for the future.
A true ideological clash.
On one side, the U.S. is promoting a world based on democratic values and free markets.
And on the other, China is promoting a world that prioritizes national sovereignty, economic development, and state-led planning.
And the audience for this competition is, well, it's the rest of the world. Specifically, the sources say Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
These are the regions that will drive global growth for the rest of the century. They are the swing states, if you will, in this ideological contest.
And their choice is going to be very practical, isn't it?
Extremely pragmatic. Many of these countries need one thing above all else: infrastructure. Ports, roads, power plants.
And this is where China's Belt and Road Initiative comes in. It's a soft power tool.
A hugely powerful one. China shows up with loans and construction teams, ready to build, often with fewer strings attached than Western lenders.
Western aid often comes with demands about democracy, human rights, anti-corruption.
And for a leader in a developing nation who just wants to get a dam built to provide electricity for their people, the Chinese offer can look a lot faster and a lot simpler.
So this competition, it's not just about movies or military bases. It's a real-world test to see which system can actually deliver a better life for more people.
And the choices that are made in places like Nairobi or Jakarta or Sao Paulo in the next 10 years will really be the final verdict on this clash of ideas.
Okay, so we've laid out the military rivalry, the clash of hard power, and we've just covered the ideological battle, the soft power competition. That brings us to the final and maybe the most important part of this.
The reality that, despite all this competition, they have to find a way to coexist.
Right, we have to ask that fundamental question. Are the U.S. and China just doomed to be enemies forever? Or is there a way for them to live together, peacefully?
It's so easy to look at the current tension and think it's just a permanent state of conflict. But all the sources, all the experts, they agree that framing it that way is incredibly dangerous.
Why? Because it ignores the things that actually bind them together.
Exactly. It ignores the existential threats that don't care about borders or political systems. The stakes for not cooperating are they're too high for everyone.
The conversation has to shift from who wins to how do we all survive?
That's it. It's not about friendship. It's about necessity.
So there's this strong belief out there that cooperation isn't just a nice idea, it's absolutely essential.
It is, because the world is facing these huge systemic problems that no one country can fix on its own.
Let's list them out. What are the big ones the sources point to?
There are 3 huge ones that demand they work together. Climate change, future pandemics, and global economic instability.
Climate change has to be at the top of the list.
It has to be. The US and China have this unique, unavoidable responsibility here. They're the 2 biggest economies.
And the 2 biggest polluters, historically and today.
Right. So their actions alone basically determine whether the world succeeds or fails on climate.
Even if every other country on Earth hits their climate targets, if these 2 don't get it right,
it's game over. The math just doesn't work without them. The sheer scale of their economies means they have to be on the same page.
And cooperation here means what? What does it look like in practice?
Well, think about it. China makes most of the world's solar panels and wind turbines. The US has a lot of the cutting-edge tech in things like carbon capture.
So they need each other to actually deploy these solutions globally and quickly.
They do, and it means agreeing on standards, investing capital together. But it's so hard to do that when you fundamentally distrust each other on security issues.
That's the core tension. How do you cooperate on saving the planet with a country you see as your primary strategic rival?
And then you have the next threat, future pandemics.
The last few years taught us a brutal lesson there.
We learned that speed, transparency, and data sharing are everything. If the world's 2 biggest powers are hoarding information or blaming each other, the next virus could be far, far deadlier.
Global health security is one of those areas where either everyone wins together or everyone loses together.
It's a classic non-zero-sum game. And the third one is the economy.
Global economic instability.
The whole world economy is built on the interaction between the US and China. If their trade wars get out of control, or if there's a major financial crisis in one country and the other doesn't help coordinate a response,
the ripple effects would be catastrophic for everyone.
So you need their central banks, their treasury departments to be in constant, trusted communication. But trust is the one thing that's in very short supply right now.
So the bottom line, what the sources are saying, is that if they can't find a way to work together on these 3 things, climate, health, and the economy,
then it becomes almost impossible to protect the planet or global stability. The cost of their competition in these areas is just too high.
Which brings us to the final conclusion. It's not a simple choice between competition or cooperation.
It has to be both. You have to reframe it. Competition is natural, it's probably unavoidable, but cooperation is necessary for survival.
It's about finding a balance.
That's the pragmatic approach. You accept that you're going to compete on military and ideological grounds. So you set up guardrails, clear rules of the road to make sure that competition doesn't spiral into a hot war.
And at the same time, you carve out specific areas where you have to work together.
You create these protected zones of cooperation for things like climate and pandemics, where you agree to set the rivalry aside for the common good.
So the goal isn't for one side to win and the other to lose.
The future probably doesn't look like that. The goal is to find a balance where both countries can be strong and successful without undermining each other or the entire global system.
That requires an incredible amount of strategic maturity from the leaders on both sides.
It's the ultimate test of 21st century statecraft. Acknowledging that you're rivals, but also recognizing that your fates are completely intertwined.
So what does this all mean for you as you're trying to make sense of this? We've covered a huge amount of ground today.
You really have, from aircraft carriers to Hollywood movies.
We started with hard power. We look at the shifting military balance, the rise of China's Navy, and how all that military muscle is really a form of high-stakes communication.
Then we moved to soft power, that battle for hearts and minds. We contrasted the American model of freedom and democracy with China's alternative pitch of stability and state-led development.
And we just wrapped up with the absolute necessity of cooperation. That no matter how deep the rivalry goes, global threats like climate change and pandemics force them to find a way to work together.
So by taking in this deep dive, you can now see beyond the daily headlines. You can understand the different layers of this relationship. The military, the cultural, the environmental.
You're equipped to understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening.
We hope we've given you that framework to process the news and really understand this defining relationship of our time.
Now, as we always do, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on.
Go back to that ideological clash we talked about in the middle of our conversation, this global competition between two different systems.
The democratic free market approach versus the stability state-led development approach.
Okay, so here's the thought. Given the absolute undeniable need for deep, trusting, long-term cooperation on threats like climate change,
Can the world really solve its biggest, most complex problems if its two most powerful countries fundamentally disagree on the best way to organize a society?
is it possible to build the trust you need to save the planet when you simultaneously believe your partner's entire political and economic system is fundamentally flawed or even a threat to your own?
That tension, that gap between the need for pragmatic cooperation and the reality of deep ideological division, that's the space to watch.
That's the central challenge that's going to define the coming years.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep asking questions and keep thinking about how all these different kinds of power connect.
We'll see you on the next deep dive. Take care.